actually see people as they're coming in, and I'm going to do a couple of quick shares. But Aaron, it's good to see your smiling face, my
Thank you,
brother.
brother. Same. Are you back in Tulsa?
I'm back in Tulsa.
Right
Yeah,
on.
and hopefully won't have to leave here again. To at least not for any Arizona related things. Um,
Hmm.
so hang on for a second. I'm just trying to get to. All right, so it says, yep, it says we're live, and
There we
let me
are.
do some quick shares here. We'll share there. We're going to share there and there and there
All right.
and there and there and there. Yeah, there too. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. There. Yep, there too. So I'm just putting all these shares out here, and I'm trying to find our religious something. What was our group called?
Religious trauma recovery.
Yeah, there we go. I want to share there too, and I think that we are good otherwise. So what's in the glass today, Aaron?
It's a Shiraz.
Oh, Shiraz, man, I love Shiraz. I have actually a very nice. It's called Haute Vignac
Mm,
Merlot,
yeah, nice.
and this is actually a. Oh, no, yeah, actually, yeah, this is a French Merlot.
Nice.
Yeah, so
Mine's just a step above box wine.
but
I
I,
got
I
like
actually I cracked this one open yesterday, and I have to say that this is one of the best ones that I've ever had.
nice.
So, cheers, man.
Cheers, cheers, everybody. See, we got Shannon Morris, Esther Omega, John Hudson, Sandy, Ben Urban.
Yep, yep,
Welcome, everybody.
yep. Welcome,
That's who I
welcome,
see.
welcome. Always good to see all of you guys out there. But we uh, just to kind of let you guys in on a little of the backstage action that goes on between Aaron and Derrick. This is your all access pass, right?
Right.
Uh, we talk, and sometimes we actually talk, but sometimes it's just a just a chat,
Hmm.
and we'll say, what are we going to talk about tonight? And so and so sometimes Aaron has something that Aaron has got something burning in him he wants to share, and I have something that's burning in me. Well, today not so much burning, but something kind of simmering, or
Mm.
it's not on the
Excuse me.
not on the front burner, kind of a back burner thing, but it's a big thing to me. And that's that. I wanted to talk about the environment.
Yeah.
And I know that some people think that that's a liberal, commie, socialist, left wing pinko topic. But the thing that you grow to understand, and especially like when you become an adult, and I tell my kids this all the time, because one of the challenges that I have are my kids eating in their room,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And I don't mind the eating in the room, just that if you eat it, get rid of it afterward, right? It's real simple. But the thing is that I can't really, get mad at them, because I was the same way, coming up. When I was a teenager, I'd eat in the room, and I'd leave my shit all over the place. And then when you become an adult and have your own place, you realize that, hey, you really can't shit in your own bed.
Hmm.
Right. So basically you have to take care of things in a way that you probably didn't, and it's a learning process. So anyway, I say that to say that we are living in a time when, and I'm going to quote some Bible here. and I'm only doing this because I know a lot of our listeners are still either in the Christian camp or kind of straddling that fence. But
Yeah.
there's a scripture in Romans that says that all of creation groans with the earnest expectation of the manifestation of the sons of God. Um, and I believe that that particular scripture speaks to how we treat the planet,
Hmm.
because I actually believe that the earth is a living organism.
Hmm.
It's not just some static pile of rocks and minerals and and trace gases and all of that. It's actually a living, breathing organism. And and so when you mistreat an organism, it tends to disease. That's the disease, right? It's at not it's the opposite of at ease. It's diseased. And I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in Michigan, and the big thing about Michigan is the Great Lakes state. Great Lakes. Michigan, Superior, Huron, Erie, and Ontario.
Hmm.
The Great Lakes. And at one point during my childhood, Lake Erie was on fire,
Hmm.
like literally on fire. And oil dumping from tankers from ships that are passing through the Great Lakes, and it's just burning. And so the conventional wisdom was that Lake Erie was dead,
Hmm.
nothing you could do about it, and that as Lake Erie went, so would go the rest of the Great Lakes, and pretty soon basically the Great Lakes, which is one of the national treasures of the natural treasures of the United States, would go to become basically a big ass toilet.
Hmm.
So something interesting happened. The governments of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ontario, they got together and said, no, it's not a good look. We can fix this.
Hmm.
And they did. And now Lake Erie is teeming with life. There's plenty of fish and aquatic mammals that live on the shores and all of that, and it's just teeming with life. And it's not perfect, but it's a long way from where it was when it was burning. It was literally on fire.
Right.
And and so I think about this like that we have the ability to fix what is wrong with the earth.
Sure.
And I'm gonna say one quick thing, and then I'm gonna kick it your way, Aaron. And that's this: that in the 70s there was this big concern about a hole in the ozone layer, and that ultraviolet rays were going to come in, and everybody's going to get skin cancer, and eventually we'd all burn to death because there's no protection. The ozone layer is going away. Well,
Hmm.
we learned that things like our right guard deodorant and our Edge shaving gel and spray paints and Freon and all these things were contributing to this ozone depletion. And so what happened? The government made a decision to ban those things. And not only did our government decide to do that, but we put pressure on the governments of the rest of the world to ban these harmful chemicals.
Hmm.
And last year, it was something that it was so faint in terms of its coverage that
Hmm.
you would never have noticed it unless you were actually, someone who actually scoured the news.
Hmm.
And it was this, that the ozone hole has just about closed up.
Interesting.
We had a serious problem that was actually threatening life on Earth as we know it, and we fixed it.
Hmm.
We fixed it. And what one of the things that sorry, I clicked the wrong thing here. Whoops, I'm still clicking the I don't know if you heard that or not, but
No.
Siri was talking to me.
Wow.
But anyway, Neil deGrasse Tyson they asked him about how would we go about colonizing Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he talked about a lot of different ways. And then somebody mentioned, they says, well, what about terraforming? What do you think about terraforming? Because
I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you brought that up.
the whole idea is that you can alter the environment of a planet by introducing life from another planet to make that new planet habitable or hospitable for human life. And so Neil deGrasse Tyson replied, he said, if we can terraform Mars, maybe we should first terraform Earth.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. We have some problems in this world, and I got a whole bunch of shit that I'm going to touch on tonight. But if we don't take this seriously, and I learned something else too. Something else that I learned, because when you have a critter in your attic, there's nobody to call but an exterminator or someone who specializes in that. You can't call a landlord. You can't call the property managers. If you own the house, you have to fix the problem. And that's the thing. We are not acting as if we own where we live. Mm-hmm. So on that note, Aaron, I'll kick it over to you, my brother.
Yeah, you left me lots to run on here. I'm gonna start with this. I'm gonna describe two parties, I guess, our two-party system. I'm going to read a description. And I want, especially people who are watching, I want you to be curious how you would answer this. I'm going to define for you political party or persuasion. This is just the definition I pulled up on Google. Willing to respect or accept behavior or opinions different from one's own, open to new ideas. Second part, relating to or denoting a political and social philosophy that promotes, ready for this, individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. And I'm just going to click on the Wikipedia here. This is a political and moral philosophy based on liberty, consent of the governed, and equality before the law. Supports individual rights, including civil rights and human rights, democracy, secularism, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and a free market economy. Now, if you had to guess based on the way media says stuff, which one you think most people would guess I'm describing? Which philosophy, conservatism or liberalism? That's actually the definition, dictionary definition and Wikipedia definition of liberalism. But I'm going to guess that most people who hear that think that would define conservatism. And that just goes to show you how far to the right conservatives have gone. Like everything I espouse there, free market society, individual rights, independence, consent of the governed.
Wow.
That's the definition of being a liberal. Anyway, I'll throw that out there. I'll just leave that right there.
That's good stuff, man.
But that's our problem. And this is what concerns me in this information age that we're living in. And one of the problems when it comes to fixing our environment and sustaining it is this anti-science and anti-expertise thing that we have going on, especially in our country right now. We're anti-science, anti-expertise. Barbara Kellerman, who used to chair, I don't know if she still does, but she used to chair the business school in Harvard, wrote a book probably about a decade ago now called The End of Leadership. And she talks about this issue and it's fascinating. She talks about how in the last, she's writing this in, I'm going to guess 2005, maybe 2010, I don't know, somewhere in there. Somebody can look it up for me. But she looks at the growing phenomena of leadership research and training and all that leadership development stuff. You remember all the John Maxwell stuff and all the, everything was about developing leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And yet points out how at that point in time, we had more of a crisis of leadership than we had ever had in our lives. And as being part of the leadership development industry, she says, it's been a huge failure in terms of its ability to produce real leadership.
Yeah.
And she talks about this whole idea of the end of expertise and talks about the internet as being a problem with that, and points to, ironically, the medical community, and talks about how, previous generations, and I know this was true in my parents, whatever the doctor said, that was law.
Yeah.
And you had one doctor. I mean, we grew up in a rural area. You had the one doctor. And if you had to go to the emergency room, because I remember having to go get stitches at the emergency room, and our family doctor met us at the emergency room and sewed me up.
Wow.
And she talks about this idea that we can get ideas and information off the internet and then kind of throw it in the doctor's faces, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting how even being written, whatever it was, whenever she wrote that, how that was a precursor to what we see in the pandemic, right?
Yep.
What we see with people being anti-science in the pandemic. And, this is my pet peeve, that people who talk about the science usually quote a scientist. That's not the same thing. The science is the actual studies and the data. And so I'm always leery of somebody who doesn't hold tentatively to their views and says they're following the science, because data changes. Science is constantly evolving, right? So we have this problem where, okay, you've got the religious aspect of it, which religion has always been the enemy of progress and the enemy of science. Back to Galileo, right?
Yep.
All that stuff. So that's not a new problem. So you have this really anti-scientific bias, and this, I would almost call it an expertise bias. I'm pulling that out of the air, kind of quoting it. Maybe it's a term that I'm misusing, but where everybody thinks they're an expert because they did a little bit of quote unquote research or something.
I did the research.
Yeah. And so in that kind of an environment, and then where messaging can be so skewed in one direction. I'll give you an example. I had a friend who was going to Mexico for the holidays, and one of the people in their family was obsessed with this idea that they were going to get kidnapped by the cartels. And so this person searches, cartel kidnappings of American women, or what, who knows what she searched. And all of a sudden, everything that starts showing up in her feed on the sites that she would go to, Google, whatever, was about the cartels in Mexico. And my son has got this thing right now. My oldest son, he watches some TikTok stuff, and he's really getting this anti-female, anti-women bias right now. Now he's 11, so give him a break. But part of the reason he's getting that, and I had to talk to him about it last night, is because he watches these TikTok videos where these women are bashing men on TikTok. And so what shows up because of his algorithms are more and more people, women bashing men. So that leads him to create a generalization that all women think that way, because there's so many of them, right?
Yeah.
And so with this same thing with my friend who's going to Mexico, well, it's just everywhere right now. Just people are getting kidnapped left and right in Mexico. And yet we looked at this in a couple months ago when we were talking about the American national religion, that when it comes to safety, Mexico is way ahead of the United States in terms of being a safe country to travel in or to live in. And so we get these biases based on these, you want to talk about ecology, these information ecologies that we live in. So you get an information ecology, and again, I don't mean to keep going back and harping on the vaccine thing, but you got to understand these people who are promoting anti-vaccine sentiment. People like Tenpenny, I can't remember her first name, that said we all turned magnetic, and RFK, who's a lawyer. But these people make a living selling you alternative health stuff. The alternative healthcare industry, the supplement industry in the United States is a multi-billion-dollar business. So they have a financial angle here that nobody's talking about. Everybody wants to talk about big pharma and their financial angle. But what about the fact that you're getting your information from a bias that has a financial thing attached to it? And so they're spinning it. They're just putting out absolute propaganda, not looking at any of the data, not looking at not one shred of the actual science, and then citing things that have nothing to do with science.
Right.
And the same thing's happening when it comes to climate change and the environment. So what's interesting to me and frustrating to me at the same time is, how do we find leadership in this age in which we live to fix these problems that we're dealing with when everybody thinks they're an expert and people are being programmed and brainwashed and manipulated by propaganda because of the algorithms and the information ecology in which they live? So we have two problems. We've got a problem with the ecology of planet Earth, but we've got a problem with the information ecology that millions of people live in that says there is no problem with planet Earth.
Yep.
Because we're anti-science and we're anti-expertise and we're anti-leadership.
And that's really the leadership vacuum is a big thing. And I want to touch on that for just a second, because right around 1980 was the first time that you started seeing CEOs and, C-level executives who had not had any military experience. Now, mind you, let me say this. I served in the Navy for 7 years. Proud of it, honorably discharged, all of that stuff, right? Learned a lot. My path for my career was set by the military. But I'm a pacifist. I don't really believe that we should be on all these far-flung military excursions. I really believe that the military should be for the immediate defense of the country and not so much to prosecute our interests abroad. But that being said, I remember right about the time that I got out of the Navy, they started implementing something called TQL, Total Quality Leadership. And it was a spinoff of TQM, which is what they call the Deming method of statistical quality control, TQM. And it was made popular in Japan because W. Edwards Deming, who was an MIT professor, went over to Japan at the behest of Douglas MacArthur, who was the governor of Japan after World War II, to help reindustrialize Japan. And so they implemented the statistical quality control, which changed the term made in Japan from meaning basically throwaway junk to meaning absolute quality, right? So basically what was happening is that these same management qualities were trying to be diffused into the military, and what you wound up getting was a cadre of managers and not leaders. And let me say this to the audience: there is a clear difference between leadership and management. A monkey can manage his food supply, but it takes leadership to take a tribe of monkeys into a herd of lions. In other words, leadership takes you places where you otherwise would not go. It forces you to reckon with things within yourself and within your environment so that you're able to do bold and courageous things that you otherwise wouldn't do. And so part of the problem is we have been run now, or we've been led now by a generation of managers, and the managers' sole intent is to make sure the store doesn't burn down,
Right.
not to build new stores, not to expand the franchise, not to grow the capability of the individuals that make up the store, but just to keep the store from burning.
Yeah.
And so what happens is this anti-science mentality comes from this management mentality. In other words, I want to keep the status quo because that is what makes me comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's what gives me it doesn't cause me any stress or any consternation. So the thing is that unless there is some bold leadership, and again, to quote the Bible, without vision, the people perish. Now, I want to call up something else too, because from World War II until about 1970, the DuPont company produced this magic substance called Teflon. And Teflon was basically, it was like a godsend in World War II because they were able to coat tanks with it, and the mud that normally would stick to the tanks didn't stick to it. So this gave the Allies an advantage over the Nazis and the Axis powers because they didn't have this coating, and this became a big deal. And this is why the Germans lost the Battle of Russia, because their tanks were literally bogged down in mud and snow, and they couldn't operate. But we, on the other hand, we had Teflon coated tanks, Teflon coated armory. So things worked real good. Well, anyway, this Teflon, they were like, okay, well, we've come up with this magic substance. What else can we put it on? And so somebody came up with the idea, hey, we could put this on cookware. And Teflon pans were born. And if you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you knew the Teflon pans were like a status symbol because you could fry that egg and just slide it right out. Right. And it didn't stick. But Teflon was made of this carbon substance that's referred to as C8.
Okay.
And C8 turned out to be highly carcinogenic, highly toxic. And so there was a study done by DuPont in the 1950s that said that the best thing to do with the waste byproduct that came from C8 would be to incinerate it or otherwise, burn it. But instead, it was more convenient to dump it into American aquifers and waterways. It was dumped into landfills. And so around about 1978, there was a big lawsuit. A West Virginia farmer, his cows started drinking from the Ohio River and they started dying. And the cows, and they were also finding deer in the area. They were suffering from the same malady. They were hemorrhaging. They were having brain hemorrhages from drinking this water. And so, long story short, this farmer sued DuPont. The federal government sued DuPont. DuPont had to pay $14 million to the federal government in fines and another $20 million to the farmers that were involved in the lawsuit, which was a slap on the wrist for DuPont because it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And then they began to do the right thing. But for years, they had just the byproduct going out of smokestacks into the air, into landfills, into the aquifers, into the waterways, into the lakes, the streams, and all of that, to the point where, and you can look this up, when I saw this blew my fucking mind, that 97% of Americans have trace to small amounts of C8 in their bloodstream.
Wow.
97% of the country is contaminated.
Wow.
And I'm gonna stop here because I got another one after this. Because remind me, do not let me get out of here without talking about Flint, because there is something there too. But the point is that once DuPont stopped dumping this chemical into the waterways and all of that, guess what? The cows stopped dying, the deer stopped dying, the birth defects among children, that they stopped, because we have the power as stewards of our environment to fix it. It's like, yes, they tell you don't shit in your own bed, but in the event that you happen to do that, just clean it up afterward. That's the moral of the story. But I'm gonna kick it back to you, Aaron. But do not let me get out of here without talking about Flint, because that's my Mac Daddy.
Okay. So I'm not an expert on climate change by any means, but I do care, and we do what we can to, recycle and whatever we can do in our small little way to try to help. But I think the other issue when it comes to this that's holding us back. So I just kind of want to take my part and talk about things that are holding us back. We got the information ecologies, we got the anti-science bias, we got a crisis.
Leadership vacuum.
Yeah, leadership vacuum. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of selfishness too. I mean, can we just be honest? We're a very selfish society. But this is a selfishness that I don't quite get. And I get that's, the misinformation is a big part of this. But don't you care about the world that your children are going to inhabit? Don't you care about what you're leaving to the next generation, to your children, to your grandchildren? And if you are a spiritually minded person who believes in reincarnation, okay, and you're selfish, don't you care about what you're going to be reincarnated into? And that's the piece that I really don't get. It really concerns me. I think about this a lot. What kind of world? And I think about my decisions and how my decisions ultimately, primarily above all else, is going to affect that next generation. For example, if America keeps going the direction that it's going, I mean, this is how I'm thinking, Derrick. I'm just being transparent. Is it in the best interest of my children to think about relocating? I mean, forget myself and what I think and what my ideologies are and my frustrations. What am I leaving to my kids? And nothing to do with the environment, but I'm going to get on a soapbox. Has nothing to do with this, but for the love of God, can't we in America, in the United States of America, have confidence that we are sending our kids to school in an environment that is protected and safe from school shootings? What the actual fuck? And here's what I tell people, and there's nothing to do with the environment, but it's crisis of leadership. I mean, it speaks to the same problem.
No, you're on something. Go.
After 9/11, I flew. We had already had plans to go to Disney World the last week of September and the first week of October in 2001. It was the best trip to Disney World we ever had, because people were so scared they were staying away. Maybe a theme park is next, right? So they were, dude, we didn't have to wait in lines. I mean, we had a blast. So you figure we're flying 2 weeks, at the most 3 weeks after 9/11, and the airports were transformed, Derrick. In November of 2001, I flew overseas, and the airports were conforming themselves to the changes that had been made in the United States. We created an entire new section of federal government called Homeland Security, virtually overnight. So here's my point. We transformed every airline, every airport in the world overnight, created a branch of government virtually overnight to keep us safe from terror attacks. Now I know people debate that and whatever, but let's just go with the standard narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Columbine was, help me out, 1997?
Yeah.
We're in 2021? And what the fuck have we done to our schools? Why couldn't we transform every school overnight to make it safer? Why couldn't we create a branch of government overnight whose primary responsibility was to make sure, forget gun control, they don't have to take guns away from people. They didn't take guns away from people. They didn't take bombs away from people. They didn't take knife cutters away from people after 9/11.
Nope.
They just transformed the environments that were targets overnight. And see, this is what disheartens me, because I don't think people appreciate the value that our politicians place on what I might call political capital or political collateral. And they don't give a fuck about these kids that get shot up. Not one fuck. Or we would have done something. So how is it that in one situation we can transform overnight? The other situation, John Hudson says it happened in 1999.
I saw that.
Close. And that was just up the road from me. So, but you see what I'm saying? Like, we can't even fix that. And I think everybody agrees we want our children to be safe when they go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an environment. So what about growing up in what about leaving the earth, the environment, to another generation? Like, why can't we come together on these issues and on these problems and come up with real solutions? Why do we, I mean, every time there is it's changed now probably because mass shootings are happening every other week, it seems like.
Yep.
But in bygone years, every time there was a mass shooting, the prices of ammunition, the stock prices primarily.
Yeah. And then they would change how much ammunition you could use and how much you could have in a magazine and all of that stuff. All these things changed.
Yeah. But stock prices, every time they talk about, their gun control, stock prices for gun manufacturing companies skyrocket.
Yep.
Dude, I'm just tired of getting played by people who are just greedy and selfish. And I feel like the stewardship of the environment is very much in that.
It's all tied together. And you're making a really good point, because here's the thing, that when we exhibit the will to do something, we fix things.
Yep.
We fix things. And I'll say this, that there is no problem that the United States has faced that if they put their moxie to it, that they can't fix. So the school shootings, which from an environmental standpoint, and this is really that is the environment that our kids are being educated in.
Right.
Okay. So from even if we look at that from a stewardship standpoint, from a ecological standpoint, that it all dovetails together. And what it is again, this is the other thing too, is that people have developed this false sense of what they think liberty is. Right. Mm-hmm. And I say this all the time, that this is liberty, that my rights end where your rights begin. Mm-hmm. That I can do whatever it is that I want to do, whatever it is that I'm capable of doing, but I must restrain myself at the point where I may do something that may cause you harm. Mm-hmm. And this is a problem with the whole school shooting thing. Again, it's like, we don't have to take guns away from people, but we can have strict gun control. We don't have to take guns away from people, but we can say that if you commit a gun crime, or if you commit a mass shooting, or if you're caught hoarding ammunition as if to prepare for some kind of paramilitary attack, that you can be prosecuted. This is not unreasonable. And again, we have a generation of milk toast, castrated management. And when I'm talking about and when I say castrated, I'm not just talking about men. I'm talking about women in management as well. There are people who just lack the fortitude to do something when they see a problem coming up. Now, I want to talk about two things real quick. One is that we have these tornadoes and storms that cut from Arkansas all the way to like the western end of North Carolina, and and it would be easy to say, well, that's just a freak weather pattern and all of that. But I was looking at videos, and basically they're having conditions in Kansas and in Nebraska that were like the Dust Bowls of the 1920s. That basically.
Dude, it was right here in Colorado. It was right here where I live. Exactly the same thing. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we were having 55-mile-an-hour winds constant, and then we were having wind gusts. They were predicting up to 100 miles per hour. I didn't see the final thing, but I mean, we're talking a dust storm where you could not see an inch in front of your face driving and would have to pull over. That was happening to us, so we were part of that too. So anyway, go ahead.
But here, you know what's interesting about those dust bowls? What's happening is that the wind is literally stripping off the topsoil from farmland and from open acreage and blowing that into the air. Now, you say what does that mean? Well, it impacts the food supply. It impacts the air quality. It impacts the ability of aircraft to travel. It impacts the ability of cars. It impacts the ability of kids to go to school, because that could create all kinds of respiratory issues. So
Absolutely.
you can't do that. And all of these tornadoes and these windstorms that are sweeping through the Plains state and the Midwest, this is stuff that doesn't normally happen. And a lot of this is because we're over farming. A lot of it is happening because we're not managing water resources. A lot of it is happening because we're dumping hydrocarbons into the air at a breakneck pace. And all of these things are helping to basically. Let me give you an example. That in Arizona, there is this phenomenon called valley fever. And valley fever is a particularly nasty respiratory illness. And it usually comes from the silica in the desert dirt that gets blown into the lungs of people. And if you have any compromise in your respiratory system, valley fever can be fatal. Now, what causes valley fever? Well, you're doing a whole lot of construction in Arizona. They're building houses and they're developing real estate as fast as they can, which this is stirring up dust that normally would not be stirred up. And then couple that with increased automobile travel, increased air travel, and you're changing the wind patterns, and so people are getting this respiratory illness. Now, the reason I say this is that when you introduce something into a living organism that does not belong there, it creates havoc in that living being's body. And I said at the beginning that I believe that the earth is a living organism. And I believe that things like water and oil, I believe that these things are like the lifeblood of the earth. And so when we begin to poison, it's just like if we have a bloodborne disorder like hepatitis, it corrupts our blood, our ability to produce healthy red blood cells, and it compromises the liver and then other organs, right? So what happens when we're polluting the water? Does that mean that some of the organs of the earth are now compromised and now it's reacting with untoward weather patterns? When we start over mining oil. We were drilling for oil before, but now we're scraping oil from shale
Come on.
out of mining operations, and then we're doing this fracking where we're injecting air and water into the earth to push oil up out of the earth. So what we're doing is basically it's like, have you ever been to get to draw blood for a blood test, and they can't draw blood because you're dehydrated, so they give you some water or some orange juice to kind of hydrate your veins so that they can this is the same thing that's happening. You know, we are basically raping the earth. And I know that that's a harsh word, trigger warning. I don't want to make light of anybody that has experienced rape. That to me is the most horrible thing that can happen to a human being. Even more so than murder, because at least after murder you're dead and you don't have to deal with it anymore. But the thing is, this is what's happening. And the last thing that I want to throw out here, because I said I wanted to talk about Flint, and Flint is a hot fucking mess, right? Basically, you have undrinkable fresh water. Well, here's the story. I grew up in Detroit, and Detroit, the city of Detroit, has one of the best municipal water systems in the world. And they make more water than the city of Detroit will ever be able to consume. So what do? Like any other good steward, they sell the water to other people. The problem is that because Detroit has gone through years of mismanagement, that basically a lot of the people who buy water from Detroit are not paying for the water. I'm talking to you, Oakland County. You're not. I'm talking to you, Genesee County. I'm talking to a lot of people that they haven't been paying for the water. So Flint was one of these cities. They were buying water from the city of Detroit because it was cheaper to buy it than it was to treat it themselves, right? Well, what happened was Flint went into receivership. They had mismanagement, and they were no longer able to pay Detroit's water bill. So they decided, well, we've got the Flint River. We've got an abundant fresh water supply right here. So we'll just start, and so they test the water, and sure enough, the water comes out nice and clean. Here's the problem. And here, let me say this. And I told my sister about this as we talked about this beforehand. And I really want to hammer this home, because we talk about the federal government. They need to do something. The state of Michigan, they need to do something. They're suing the governor. They're suing the state. They're suing the federal government. But guess what? They're missing one key component. General Motors. Because General Motors manufactured in Flint for years and dumped their toxic waste into the Flint River. Now, most of this stuff was like lead and zinc and other heavy metals that went, and basically because it's heavier than water, it goes down to the bottom of the river and it settles, right? So over time, you take a water sample. And yeah, it turns out fine. Why? Because everything that is settled at the bottom. But what happens when you start doing industrial level pumping of the water from the Flint River? Now you're going to dredge up all of that shit that was at the bottom of the river, and you're going to pass this on to all the people who are consuming your drinking water. But for as bad as Flint is, and for my man Terry Wilson, if you're out there listening, because you brought this to my attention, that Benton Harbor, Michigan, where the headquarters of Whirlpool, they did basically the same thing. They dumped their toxic waste into the Grand River, and now as a result, Benton Harbor's water is even worse than Flint's, but they don't talk about that because Benton Harbor is a much smaller municipality. The point is that nobody's talking about going to General Motors and say, hey, General Motors, for all the shit that you've done, fix this. Now, here's the problem in leadership and corporate law, right? Because if you know anything about what goes on in corporate America, that during the financial apocalypse of 2008, 2009, that General Motors was reorganized into the new GM. It is not the same company that William Durant founded back in the early 1900s. It's not the same company. So what General Motors now is able to say is that, hey, we're not liable because we're not the same company. Even though they're still using a lot of the same apparatus in Flint, they're saying, well, it's not our responsibility. We're a new company. We don't have any culpability here. So again, it's a failure in the vacuum of leadership, and also it is an unwillingness on the part of people to stand up and do something to exercise stewardship over the resources that they have. I mean, and here, let me say this, and I'm going to shut up, Aaron. That between our ecosystem, our environment, I'm going to tell you something. We're in what I call the golden age of space travel right now. I mean, like people love to harken back to the days of Werner von Braun and the Apollo program, which, by the way, was built by Nazis, but that's another story for another time. That they thought that, hey, the Apollo program, that was the pinnacle of American space travel. No. Because now we have Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Sir Richard Branson, who are doing space travel privately. And they're doing some amazing things that NASA never dreamed of doing. And so there's this appetite on the part of the world to go beyond our gravitational bounds and go forth and express the same manifest destiny that we did in the Americas into space. Well, guess what? Until we get our shit together here on Earth, we don't have any fucking business going anywhere else trying to change anything else. We don't have I believe that if there are aliens and UFOs that are flying around here, I believe that in short time they're going to start shooting these fuckers down when they really start to get beyond the moon. They're going to say, okay, we don't want your shit out here, and I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out there. I could be wrong. That could be a big conspiracy theory, but hey, this is the deal. We have an opportunity, just like we fixed the ozone layer, just like we fixed Lake Erie, just like we fixed the Ohio River, just like we fixed a lot of Appalachia, a lot of these problems, a lot of these environmental issues that we've had, we've managed to fix them. And we fix them when we resolve that we're just not going to shit in our own bed and lay in it anymore. Yep. And the same thing to your point, Aaron, and this is it. I promise I'm gonna stop my Baptist close at this point.
You're fine,
but that when we decide that we're going to have a clean environment for our kids to be educated, which means that no lead paint, no asbestos, no CFCs, no C8s, none of these things, and no fucking guns in the school, that when we make this decision to clean all of this up, then we'll start seeing real change. But until that point, the earth is going to continue to groan out for the sons of God to finally show up and fix this shit.
So just a little commentary on stuff you said. When you're describing the earth as a living thing, you're describing water, oil as the blood veins of the planet, and then you describe what we're doing to that. Does that mean that humanity itself has become kind of a cancer?
We're the virus. We're COVID to the earth.
So is it possible? I've been following this, and who knows what's going to happen with this pandemic? Who knows? I mean, I think just to be an equal opportunity offender here, and somebody that has people that I care about, that I need to be cautious. Let's just say that. So I err on the side of caution. Have we fucking lost our minds with overreacting in real time? Like with this Omicron variant and that kind of thing. And here's what I mean by that. So and I better be careful because I'm talking about my employer, but I'm on a college campus where we have to be not only vaccinated, but boosted. Fine. No problem with that. And I'm in a meeting, departmental meeting, And they bring us into this meeting. Now, granted, their intent was good because it's the holidays. They didn't want anybody getting sick over the holidays. But here we are, all vaccinated, all boosted by requirement. And we are sitting 8 feet apart in chairs with masks. And we don't even, and we haven't even had a case yet. I'm not saying we don't have it here because we probably do, but we don't even have a case of Omicron yet.
Wow.
So can we tap the brakes a little bit with the overreacting? But I was listening to an expert today talking about an Omicron and how it probably replicated in an animal reservoir. And that's how you saw so many mutations happening so quickly. So if we're going to have this virus jumping between animal reservoirs and humans and becoming more aggressive each time, are we ever going to get out of this?
Well, I've talked with several people. I talked with my sister. I talked with Keenan Davis. I've talked with some other people, and I think you and I have talked. There is no going back. I mean, we talked about this last week. There is no more normal to go back to. Everybody needs to dispense with that notion. At this point, we need to say what is the path forward, and hitch our wagon to that, and go forward.
Yeah. I agree. But is this is crazy thought. So I'm on my second glass of wine, so I'll blame it on that.
No problem, man.
But then if we're like the virus to the earth, then does some of what we're seeing, the earth's immune system kicking in or attempting to kick in?
I mean, I honestly believe that there is some truth to that. That what we're seeing is an immune response of the planet to a viral invasion.
Yeah.
And and here's the thing. We have the ability to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
It's well within our grasp. I think like this is I have to say something, because when I was a good conservative capitalist Christian Republican,
Yeah.
I used to be against electric cars. I said, when the market dictates that we have electric cars, we'll have electric cars. Well, here's the thing, that electric cars are necessary. And I used to say, well, we're just transferring the emissions from the tailpipe to the smokestack because we got to produce electricity. No, we produce more than enough electricity to support electric cars. It doesn't require the production of any additional electricity to provide that. What we need is infrastructure, and that's what we don't have.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that over time, that as we approach peak electric car, and the internal combustion engine starts to go away, we'll start to see overall air pollution fall, simply because the greatest polluter, the greatest mechanical polluter, will go away.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reality is that there could be, and I could go really deep into this, but I'm not. The market, here's the thing: the government has a mechanism for producing winners and losers. That's why there were once 20 major aircraft manufacturers in America, and now there are 2. That there were once over 100 American car companies, now there are 3. And the government helps to pick these winners and losers.
Yeah.
When the government awarded a contract to Willys to produce the Jeep, to Chrysler to produce the M1 tank, it picked winners and losers. when it picked when it picked Boeing aircraft over Vought aircraft, it picked winners and losers.
Mhm.
So the thing is that we have the ability, and I mean, basically the government gives subsidies for electric cars, but I don't think that it's nearly enough. Giving a $7,000 subsidy on a $100,000 car provides no real incentive to buy the car. I mean, because somebody that's going to buy
Right.
a
Right.
$100,000 car, they're going to buy $100,000 car no matter what, no matter what the incentive is. But if
Right.
you make those incentives, or if you scale them so that the average people can get them, and also build in incentives for the average Joe to buy a car, uh, you know, or things like what President Biden is doing and trying to increase the infrastructure of charging stations across the country. All of these things are things that will help incentivize electric cars, and what will happen is that the overall emissions will fall. Now watch this. I'm gonna say this one more thing, that certain cities like Atlanta, Chattanooga, Tennessee, I think Houston, Texas, that have emissions testing, these emissions tests are going away.
Mhm.
And the reason why they're going away is because the pollution that the cars were causing is going away, because people are buying newer cars, they're keeping them in better tune, and you have things like catalytic converters and unleaded gas and all of these things, low sulfur fuel, that helps to reduce
Mhm.
tailpipe emissions. But
Mhm.
what they're also not factoring in are the numbers of electric cars and hybrids that are on the road. That also is lowering tailpipe emissions. So again, it's like, people say, well, I don't want the government picking winners and losers. They already do, boys and girls.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's all.
Yeah. Hold on one second.
Uh-huh.
What? It's in 14. Go, leave me alone. I'll be upstairs to see you in a second. Sorry. I've been
No
looking
worries.
over this way because my son keeps trying to get my attention.
Yep.
I'm not distracted from what you're saying. Um, I mean, so much I could say there, Derrick. I just don't even know. I don't even know what to say. I mean, this is definitely an issue that's above my pay grade to comment on too much, because I haven't dived into the information to the level that you have for sure. It's been fascinating to hear you talk about this, and I'm so glad we decided to do this as a topic. Um, talk about electric cars. I think of Elon Musk, and if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, somebody correct me if I am, but if I'm not mistaken, he's one of the primary ones right now that's talking about. You talked about the space program, talk about electric cars. He's one of the primary ones right now talking about terraforming Mars.
Yep.
And maybe that's what it takes, because yeah, we could fix it, but it would take a massive effort from all these competing humans, industries, whatever, to fix it. Maybe you just need some people that are forward thinking, terraform Mars. The aliens might not like it though.
Well, this is the thing. One of the things that I love about what we do here is that in our conversations, I think we take people where they ordinarily wouldn't go.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not saying that to say that you and I are such much or anything, but the point is that leadership. I'll tell you something, that when I was in the military, that if you had someone who was going to lead you into a hot spot, you better be sure that this guy has your back, that this guy has your best interests at heart. Because if you follow somebody that doesn't have your best interests at heart into a firefight, you are going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's life or death. And I think that one of the things that we I always say this, we used to have this thing with the kids that when somebody got hurt, the first thing I said, okay, is anything broken? No. Great. Okay. Is anybody bleeding? No. Is anybody dead? No. Okay, great. So we've got a fixable situation here, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
and that was the escalation that I used to walk through with them.
Yep.
and but I think that what happens is that I realize that as a parent and with your kids just going out and being kids, that there's a possibility that something really bad can happen, right? And you can't discount that possibility, but you don't want, it's like plan for the worst but expect the best kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And but it takes a level of leadership to help shepherd your kids through the minefield of childhood
Right. Right.
in such a way that they come out of it alive, right?
Right.
So I think that that parents, I think that parenthood, I really believe that parenthood breeds leadership. That when you see, if you show me a good parent, I'll show you a good leader.
Yeah, it's true, Derrick.
And so the thing is that, listen, life, for better or for worse, folks, life is a combat sport. And you better be careful about who you following in the combat. That's all.
Yep. I want to come back and address a comment from John Hudson. I don't know if John, if you're still watching, but when I was talking about the school shootings and we were talking about gun control and stuff, he made a comment. He said, do us as a society need to do more to promote and aid in the help of mental health? So I wanted to respond to that as a mental health worker, somebody who does it every single day. It's interesting to me, and I'm not, I'm reading a comment, John, so we can't have a conversation here. So I'm just going off. I'm not saying this was your intention, but anytime there's anytime there's a mass shooting, the issue gets diverted by the media to mental health. And so I want to just make a few comments about that. First off, I want to say the problem with mental health in America is supply and demand. There is way more demand and need for mental health than there is for supply. And by supply, I mean people who are really trained in knowing how to understand and address the issues. Right now in my city, I talked to someone today who desperately needs probably some medication to address a mental health issue, and you're looking at a 6-month waiting list.
Wow.
To get in to see a psychiatrist. Now, you can go to your primary care doctor, but again, just keep in mind, like the only field of medicine that exists, the only one, where they don't actually have a way to measure the cause and effect is in the brain and with mental health. So here's what I mean by that. Any other organ that they're going to operate on or treat, they x-ray, they MRI, they take your blood samples. There's ways to measure cause and effect. A psychiatrist, or any doctor for that matter, does not look at the organ that they're treating, which is the brain. And there is no way to measure. Like I'm on blood pressure medicine. I've had high blood pressure forever for whatever reason. So I can put a blood pressure cuff on and they can give me medicine, and then they can measure the effect, not based on my feedback, but based on what comes through in the blood pressure cuff, right?
Yep.
With mental health, the brain is so complex, number one, that we know very little about what actually goes on there. And number two, there's no way to measure someone's serotonin level. There's no way to, the only way you can measure, the only feedback loop that you have is dialogue with the patient. So there are some antidepressants that in the wrong people, they will make them more depressed.
Yep.
And in fact, activate suicidal. This is amazing to me. It will activate suicidal ideations or suicidal thinking in people who aren't suicidal. And the only feedback you have is a conversation. Well, if you're looking at a 6-month waiting list to get in, then what are you looking at for a follow-up?
Wow.
I know a mental health clinic in our city that they're turning away 150 patients a month because there are not enough providers. So absolutely, we have a mental health crisis in this culture. And absolutely, we do not have the supply to meet the demand. and we don't have the expertise to nuance treatment in a way that helps people to the degree that society wants to see us help people. And so what happens when we shift the conversation from what can we do, let's shift it from gun control, all right? Let's just shift it away from that. What can we do to keep guns out of schools? What can we do to prevent shooters from showing up, opening the doors, bringing it to school, and blasting people on the playground or in classrooms? It's not that hard. Like I said, we transformed airports. We didn't get rid of bombs. We didn't get rid of terrorists. We didn't get rid of any of that stuff. So we shift the conversation from gun control. We shift it to mental health. That's a political move. Now, yes, we have a mental health crisis. I just talked about it. It's a crisis of supply and demand, right? But here's the problem that we encounter as healthcare workers. Part of my job because I work at a school, college campus. So part of my job in every single session is to evaluate a person as a threat for either suicide or homicide, threat to someone else. Now, how in the hell do I actually do that? Because someone who really wants to kill themselves, they're not going to disclose that. And studies show that lots of people who suicide make up their minds in 15 minutes.
Yep.
15 minutes they go from not being suicidal to being suicidal to completing. If you're going to kill people, you aren't going to open up to your therapist and say, unless you don't want to, and you're not a threat. If somebody opens up to me and says, and I have had this, I want to murder so-and-so, or I want to murder someone, or I want to do harm, they're asking for help in that moment. And they are fortunate enough to have a provider sitting in front of them that can do something to help them to not do what they don't want to do. But somebody who really wants to do that, they're going to fucking lie.
Yep.
And then that's going to fall as a liability to me because I didn't pick that up. Well, how am I supposed to pick that up? With someone who is psychopathic, sociopathic, or hell-bent on causing harm. So I just want to address that issue because in the case of the Las Vegas shooter, which I think still maybe, I don't know, I can't keep up with it anymore, but at one time it was the biggest mass shooting in America, right? The Las Vegas shooter had no history of mental health issues. None. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't something wrong up there, but how do you identify that? And so the burden for mental health care workers and the pandemic, you want to talk about the burden to frontline workers. I mean, the pandemic has caused absolutely social isolation, suicidal ideation, hopelessness. I heard today about a kid that committed suicide because he was sure he was going to get COVID and didn't want to get COVID and didn't see any point in living with the future that he was looking at. Remember, I'm really going off on this, and please forgive me. But, children don't have fully developed brains. And the last part of your brain to develop is the frontal lobe. And that's where judgment and self-reflection and self-retrospection, that's where all that stuff comes in. And that's why they recruit people for the military at 18, because your brain's not fully developed till you're between 23 and 25. So you cannot do an accurate risk assessment for yourself. That's why we do stupid shit when we're teenagers or whatever, and we worry about our teenagers now, because the part of your brain that tells you that the stop system, as they call it in addiction counseling, you've got a go system that's more the reptilian brain, the primary brain. You got a stop system that's the neurocortex that says, let's think this through. Let's think in terms of cause and effect. Let's think this through logically. That doesn't develop fully in some people until they're 25 or beyond.
Yep.
So it's a very, very, very complex issue and problem that has to be dealt with from the mental health aspect. And I know that's totally off the topic.
No.
But I wanted to address that.
I mean, here's the thing, that all of this goes back to how do we process information, right?
Yep.
How are we processing information? And the other thing too is that from a mental health standpoint, what are we doing to teach people how to cope?
Right. Nothing. I mean, we'll still teach geography in school, but we won't make people take a class on emotional regulation.
Yep.
or communication or conflict resolution or relationships. Something they're going to do every day of their life for the rest of their life. And they can Google where fucking Moldova is.
Exactly.
All right, I'm off my soapbox.
No,
I just want people to understand from the inside in dealing with mental health every day. I want people to understand this is a very complex problem. There is way more demand in our country, especially right now, than we have supply. We don't have enough therapists. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough psychiatrists. Your PCP, your primary care physician, come on, they're there to treat common illnesses. They can't go into something as complex as the brain and do it effectively. And you can't get into a specialist in my community for 6 months.
Yeah.
I would never let a primary care physician treat my children for mental health issues.
No. But again, that goes back to the knowledge vacuum and what do we trust? In other words, you know, are you going to have an electrician fix your plumbing issue, or are you going to have a small engine mechanic fix your car? I mean, basically, we have to understand that people do learn and specialize in different things. That's like when you're talking about mental health, I shut up because that is not my forte. That's not my area of expertise. And so I have to defer to you when you talk about mental health, because you're speaking from a position of training, of experience, and understanding. So, you know, one of the things I want to say to everybody out there, listen, you know, when it comes to like environment, if somebody says that they are an environmental scientist, listen to them. If they say they are an epidemiologist, listen to them. If they're virologists, listen to them. If they are a psychologist or a psychiatrist, listen to them, because they have studied, they are professionals. And yes, you might figure something out that they don't know, but as my grandfather used to say, a broken clock is right twice a day, but it's not qualified to teach you how to tell time.
Dude, that's probably a great place to stop. I mean, that really is it. We have to get back to honoring expertise in our society and realizing that, man, the more you get into stuff, the more you realize you know what you don't know. Like a true expert, you want to know the hallmark of a true expert. They're humble, because they know enough now to know what they don't know. And they realize in I've dealt with people on expertise on almost every level: medicine, psychology, theology, science, and every single one of them will tell you there's more that they don't know than what they actually know.
Yep.
And so the hallmark, if you want to know, am I listening to a real expert? If they're speaking with too much certainty, they're speaking with too much bravado, they're probably not an expert.
Yep.
Especially in these areas that we're talking about that are so complex, right?
Yep. And, you know, another one that I used to hear this in the military. They said that, you know, you got to be careful when people call themselves an expert, because X is an unknown quantity and spurt is a drip under pressure.
Hey, Derrick, so next week is, if I'm not mistaken,
it's Christmas Eve. So probably not.
I can't be here.
You're not going to be here.
I won't be able to be. I've got other places.
No problem. And then the week after that is New Year's Eve.
Right.
So we can, so the next 2 weeks we can probably just like take off and let everybody know, hey, don't look for us for the next 2 weeks. But trust me, we'll come back in 2022 with the fucking guns blazing.
It would be good. Maybe we should, or maybe I should just do a live sometime on my own. But Derrick, I'd love to get your input on this. But it'd be interesting to do, because Ben commented about mental health. There's still a stigma to it. Somehow you're unclean or untouchable or whatever. Listen, the brain is an organ in your body, just like your pancreas that may not be producing enough insulin if you're diabetic, just like your kidneys if you got to go to get dialysis, just like your heart, or like me if you have high blood pressure. Your brain is an organ.
Yep.
in your body. And this idea that every other part of your body can have a disease that can be treated medically except your brain is fucking archaic and prehistoric. And we might as well be bleeding George Washington with strep throat again with that kind of mentality. So maybe that's something I need to do on my own, but I'd love to have a conversation in the future where we just talk about mental health.
No, you know something, let's kick off 2022 with talking about mental health. I think that that's a great place to start. I mean, if we could just pencil that in and say that that's where we're going to start, I'm good with that. And
cool.
and I'll do my homework so that I could try to keep up with you.
Dude, I was keeping up with you tonight. If people couldn't tell, I mean, I was trying to make my contribution, but almost like we're having two different conversations because of my lack of knowledge in this area. So that and cars and computers, dude.
Dude, we're growing together in real time, and I love it.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely. All right, man. Love you.
Love you too.
I'm sure I'll talk to you before, but have a great Christmas, great New Year's, everybody.
Yep. Everybody, y'all have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Absolutely. And we'll see y'all in 2022. Piece of hair grease.
Later, man.